Chapter 33. You have enumerated with so ready a memory, and so copiously, the opinions of the philosophers, from Thales the Milesian, concerning the nature of the gods, that I am surprised to see so much learning in a Roman. But do you think they were all madmen, who thought that a deity could by some possibility exist, without hands and feet? Does not even this consideration have weight with you when you consider what is the use and advantage of limbs in men, and lead you to admit that the gods have no need of them? What necessity can there be of feet without walking, or of hands if there is nothing to be grasped? The same may be asked of the other parts of the body, in which nothing is vain, nothing useless, nothing superfluous. Therefore we may infer that no art can imitate the skill of nature. Shall the deity then have a tongue and not speak, teeth, palate, and jaws, though he will have no use for them? Shall the members which nature has given to the body for the sake of generation be useless to the deity? Nor would the internal parts be less superfluous than the external. What comeliness is there in the heart, the lungs, the liver, and the rest of them, abstracted from their use? I mention these because you place them in the deity on account of the beauty of the human form. Depending on these dreams, not only Epicurus, Metrodorus, and Hermachus declaimed against Pythagoras, Plato, and Empedocles, but that little harlot Leontium presumed to write against Theophrastus. Indeed, she had a neat Attic style, but yet, to think of her arguing against Theophrastus! So much did the garden of Epicurus abound with these liberties, and indeed you are always complaining against them. Zeno wrangled. Why need I mention Albutius? Nothing could be more elegant or humane than Phaedrus, yet a sharp expression would disgust the old man. Epicurus treated Aristotle with great contumely. He foully slandered Phaedo, the disciple of Socrates. He pelted Timocrates, the brother of his companion Metrodorus, with whole volumes because he disagreed with him in some trifling point of philosophy. He was ungrateful even to Democritus, whose follower he was, and his master Nausiphanes, from whom he learned nothing, had no better treatment from him. Chapter 34. Zeno gave abusive language not only to those who were then living, as Apollodorus, Sillus, and the rest, but he called Socrates, who was the father of philosophy, the Attic buffoon, using the Latin word scura. He never called Chrysippus by any name but Ctesippus. And you yourself, a little before, when you were numbering up a senate, as we may call them, of philosophers, scrupled not to say that the most eminent men talked like foolish visionary dotards. Certainly, therefore, if they have all erred in regard to the nature of the gods, it is to be feared that there are no such beings. What you deliver on that head are all whimsical notions, and not worthy the consideration even of old women. For you do not seem to be in the least aware what a task you draw on yourselves, if you should prevail on us to grant that the same form is common to gods and men. The deity would then require the same trouble in dressing, the same care of the body, that mankind does. He must walk, run, lie down, lean, sit, hold, speak, and discourse. You need not be told the consequence of making the gods male and female. Therefore I cannot sufficiently wonder how this chief of yours came to entertain these strange opinions. But you can constantly insist on the certainty of this tenet, that the deity is both happy and immortal. Supposing he is so, would his happiness be less perfect if he had not 2 feet? Or cannot that blessedness or beatitude, call it what you will, they are both harsh terms, but we must mollify them by use, can it not, I say, exist in that sun, or in this world, or in some eternal mind that has not human shape or limbs? All you say against it is, that you never saw any happiness in the sun or the world. What then? Did you ever see any world but this? No, you will say. Why therefore do you presume to assert that there are not only 600,000 worlds, but that they are innumerable? Reason tells you so. Will not reason tell you likewise that as, in our inquiries into the most excellent nature, we find none but the divine nature can be happy and eternal, so the same divine nature surpasses us in excellence of mind, and, as in mind, so in body? Why therefore, as we are inferior in all other respects, should we be equal in form? For human virtue approaches nearer to the divinity than human form. 35. To return to the subject I was upon, what can be more childish than to assert that there are no such creatures as are generated in the Red Sea or in India? The most curious inquirer cannot arrive at the knowledge of all those creatures which inhabit the earth, sea, fens, and rivers. And shall we deny the existence of them because we never saw them? That similitude which you are so very fond of is nothing to the purpose. Is not a dog like a wolf? And, as Ennius says, the monkey, filthiest beast, how like to man? Yet they differ in nature. No beast has more sagacity than an elephant. Yet, where can you find any of a larger size? I am speaking here of beasts. But among men, do we not see a disparity of manners in persons very much alike, and a similitude of manners in persons unlike? If this sort of argument were once to prevail, Velleius, observe what it would lead to. You have laid it down as certain that reason cannot possibly reside in any but the human form. Another may affirm that it can exist in none but a terrestrial being, in none but a being that is born, that grows up, and receives instruction, and that consists of a soul, and an infirm and perishable body, in short, in none but a mortal man. But if you decline those opinions, why should a single form disturb you? You perceive that man is possessed of reason and understanding, with all the infirmities which I have mentioned interwoven with his being, abstracted from which you nevertheless know God, you say, if the lineaments do but remain. This is not talking considerately, but at a venture, for surely you did not think what an encumbrance anything superfluous or useless is, not only in man, but a tree. How troublesome it is to have a finger too much. And why so? Because neither use nor ornament requires more than 5. But your deity has not only a finger more than he wants, but a head, a neck, shoulders, sides, a paunch, back, hams, hands, feet, thighs, and legs. Are these parts necessary to immortality? Are they conducive to the existence of the deity? Is the face itself of use? One would rather say so of the brain, the heart, the lights, and the liver, for these are the seats of life. The features of the face contribute nothing to the preservation of it. 36. You censured those who, beholding those excellent and stupendous works, the world in its respective parts, the heaven, the earth, the seas, and the splendor with which they are adorned, who contemplating the sun, moon, and stars, and who, observing the maturity and changes of the seasons and vicissitudes of times, inferred from thence that there must be some excellent and eminent essence that originally made and still moves, directs, and governs them. Suppose they should mistake in their conjecture, yet I see that what they aim at. But what is that great and noble work which appears to you to be the effect of a divine mind, and from which you conclude that there are gods? I have, say you, a certain information of a deity imprinted on my mind, of a bearded Jupiter, I suppose, and a helmeted Minerva. But do you really imagine them to be such? How much better are the notions of the ignorant vulgar, who not only believe the deities have members like ours, but that they make use of them, and therefore they assign them a bow and arrows, a spear, a shield, a trident, and lightning. And, though they do not behold the actions of the gods, yet they cannot entertain a thought of the deity doing nothing. The Egyptians, so much ridiculed, held no beasts to be sacred, except on account of some advantage which they had received from them. The ibis, a very large bird, with strong legs and a horny long beak, destroys a great number of serpents. These birds keep Egypt from pestilential diseases by killing and devouring the flying serpents brought from the deserts of Libya by the southwest wind, which prevents the mischief that may attend their biting while alive, or any infection when dead. I could speak of the advantage of the ichneumon, the crocodile, and the cat, but I am unwilling to be tedious. Yet I will conclude that observing that the barbarians paid divine honors to beasts because of the benefits they received from them, whereas your gods not only confer no benefit, but are idle, and do no single act of any description whatever. 37. They have nothing to do, your teacher says. Epicurus, truly like indolent boys, thinks nothing preferable to idleness. Yet these very boys, when they have a holiday, entertain themselves in some sportive exercise. But we are to suppose the deity in such an inactive state, that if he should move, we may justly fear he would be no longer happy. This doctrine divests the gods of motion and operation. Besides, it encourages men to be lazy, as they are by this taught to believe that the least labor is incompatible even with divine felicity. But let it be as you would have it, that the deity is in the form and image of a man. Where is his abode? Where is his habitation? Where is the place where he is to be found? What is his course of life? And what is it that constitutes the happiness which you assert that he enjoys? For it seems necessary that a being who is to be happy must use and enjoy what belongs to him. And with regard to place, even those natures which are inanimate have each their proper stations assigned to them, so that the earth is the lowest, then water is next above the earth, the air is above the water, and fire has the highest situation of all allotted to it. Some creatures inhabit the earth, some the water, and some of an amphibious nature live in both. There are some also who are thought to be born in fire, and which often appear fluttering in burning furnaces. In the first place, therefore, I ask you, where is the habitation of your deity? Secondly, what motive is it that stirs him from his place, supposing he ever moves? And lastly, since it is peculiar to animated beings to have an inclination to something that is agreeable to their several natures, what is it that the deity effects? And to what purpose does he exert the motion of his mind and reason? In short, how is he happy? How eternal? Whichever of these points you touch upon, I am afraid that you will come lamely off, for there is never a proper end to reasoning which proceeds on a false foundation. For you asserted likewise that the form of the deity is perceptible by the mind, but not by sense. that it is neither solid nor invariable in number, that it is to be discerned by similitude and transition, and that a constant supply of images is perpetually flowing on from innumerable atoms, on which our minds are intent, so that we, from that, conclude that divine nature to be happy and everlasting. 38. What, in the name of those deities concerning whom we are now disputing, is the meaning of all this? For if they exist only in thought, and have no solidity nor substance, what difference can there be between thinking of a hippo-centaur and thinking of a deity? Other philosophers call every such conformation of the mind a vain motion, but you term it the approach and entrance of images into the mind. Thus, when I imagine that I behold T. Gracchus haranguing the people in the Capitol, and collecting their suffrages concerning M. Octavius, I call that a vain motion of the mind. But you affirm that the images of Gracchus and Octavius are present, which are only conveyed to my mind when they have arrived at the Capitol. The case is the same, you say, in regard to the deity, with the frequent representation of which the mind is so affected, that from thence it may be clearly understood that the gods are happy and eternal. Let it be granted that there are images by which the mind is affected, yet it is only a certain form that occurs, and why must that form be pronounced happy? Why eternal? But what are those images you talk of, and whence do they proceed? This loose manner of arguing is taken from Democritus, but he is reproved by many people for it, nor can you derive any conclusions from it. The whole system is weak and imperfect, for what can be more improbable than that the images of Homer, Archilochus, Romulus, Numa, Pythagoras, and Plato should come into my mind, and yet not in the form in which they existed? How therefore can they be those persons? And whose images are they? Aristotle tells us that there never was such a person as Orpheus the poet, and it is said that the verse called Orphic verse was the invention of Cercops, a Pythagorean. Yet Orpheus, that is to say the image of him, as you will have it, often runs in my head. What is the reason that I entertain one idea of the figure of the same person in you another? Why do we image to ourselves such things as never had any existence, and which never can have, such as Scyllas and chimeras? Why do we frame ideas of men, countries, and cities which we never saw? How is it that the very first moment that I choose, I can form representations of them in my mind? How is it that they come to me even in my sleep without being called on or sought after? 39. The whole affair, Velleius, is ridiculous. You do not impose images on our eyes only, but on our minds. Such is the privilege which you have assumed of talking nonsense with impunity. But there is, you say, a transition of images flowing on in great crowds in such a way that, out of many, some one at least must be perceived. I should be ashamed of my incapacity to understand this if you, who assert it, could comprehend it yourselves. For how do you prove that these images are continued in an uninterrupted motion? Or, if uninterrupted, still how do you prove them to be eternal? There is a constant supply, you say, of innumerable atoms, but must they, for that reason, be all eternal? To elude this, you have recourse to equilibration, for so, with your leave, I will call your isonomia, and say that as there is a sort of nature mortal, so there must also be a sort which is immortal. By the same rule, as there are men mortal, there are men immortal, and as some arise from the earth, some must arise from the water also, and as there are causes which destroy, there must likewise be causes which preserve. Be it as you say, but let those causes preserve which have existence themselves. I cannot conceive these, your gods, to have any. But how does all this face of things arise from atomic corpuscles? Were there any such atoms? As there are not, they might perhaps impel one another, and be jumbled together in their motion, but they could never be able to impart form, or figure, or color, or animation, so that you by no means demonstrate the immortality of your deity. 40. Let us now inquire into his happiness. It is certain that without virtue there can be no happiness, but virtue consists in action. Now your deity does nothing, therefore he is void of virtue, and consequently cannot be happy. What sort of life does he lead? He has a constant supply, you say, of good things, without any intermixture of bad. What are those good things? Sensual pleasures, no doubt, for you know no delight of the mind, but what arises from the body, and returns to it. I do not suppose, Velleius, that you are like some of the Epicureans who are ashamed of those expressions of Epicurus, in which he openly avows that he has no idea of any good separate from wanton and obscene pleasures, which, without a blush, he names distinctly. What food, therefore, what drink, what variety of music or flowers, what kind of pleasures of touch, what odors will you offer to the gods to fill them with pleasures? The poets indeed provide them with banquets of nectar and ambrosia, and a Hebe or Ganymede to serve up the cup. But what is it, Epicurus, that you do for them? For I do not see from whence your deity should have those things, nor how he could use them. Therefore the nature of man is better constituted for a happy life than the nature of the gods, because men enjoy various kinds of pleasures. But you look on all those pleasures as superficial which delight the senses only by a titillation, as Epicurus calls it. Where is to be the end of this trifling? Even Philo, who followed the Academy, could not bear to hear the soft and luscious delights that the Epicureans despised, for with his admirable memory he perfectly remembered and used to repeat many sentences of Epicurus in the very words in which they were written. He likewise used to quote many which were more gross, from Metrodorus, the sage colleague of Epicurus, who blamed his brother Timocrates because he would not allow that everything which had any reference to a happy life was to be measured by the belly. Nor has he said this once only, but often. You grant what I say, I perceive, for you know it to be true. I can produce the books if you should deny it. But I am not now reproving you from referring all things to the standard of pleasure. That is another question. What I am now showing is that your gods are destitute of pleasure, and therefore, according to your own manner of reasoning, they are not happy. 41. But they are free from pain. Is that sufficient for beings who are supposed to enjoy all good things and the most supreme felicity? The deity, they say, is constantly meditating on his own happiness, for he has no other idea which can possibly occupy his mind. Consider a little, reflect what a figure the deity would make if he were to be idly thinking of nothing throughout all eternity, but it is very well with me, and I am happy. Nor do I see why this happy deity should not fear being destroyed, since without any intermission he is driven and agitated by an everlasting incursion of atoms, and since images are constantly floating off from him. Your deity, therefore, is neither happy nor eternal. Epicurus, it seems, has written books concerning sanctity and piety towards the gods. But how does he speak on these subjects? You would say that you were listening to Coruncanius or Scaevola, the high priests, and not to a man who tore up all religion by the roots, and who overthrew the temples and altars of the immortal gods, not indeed with hands like Xerxes, but with arguments. For what reason is there for your saying that men ought to worship the gods, when the gods not only do not regard men, but are entirely careless of everything, and absolutely do nothing at all? But they are, you say, of so glorious and excellent a nature that a wise man is induced by their excellence to adore them. Can there be any glory or excellence in that nature which only contemplates its own happiness, and neither will do, nor does, nor ever did anything? Besides, what piety is due to a being from whom you receive nothing? Or how can you, or anyone else, be indebted to him who bestows no benefits? For piety is only justice towards the gods, but what right have they to it, when there is no communication whatever between the gods and men? And sanctity is the knowledge of how we ought to worship them. But I do not understand why they are to be worshipped, if we are neither to receive nor expect any good from them. 42. And why should we worship them from an admiration only of that nature in which we can behold nothing excellent? And as for that freedom from superstition, which you are in the habit of boasting of so much, it is easy to be free from that feeling when you have renounced all belief in the power of the gods, unless indeed you imagine that Diagoras or Theodorus, who absolutely denied the being of the gods, could possibly be superstitious. I do not suppose that even Protagoras could, who doubted whether there were gods or not. The opinions of these philosophers are not only destructive of superstition, which arises from a vain fear of the gods, but of religion also, which consists in a pious adoration of them. What think you of those who have asserted that the whole doctrine concerning the immortal gods was the invention of politicians, whose view was to govern that part of the community by religion which reason could not influence? Are not their opinions subversive of all religion? Or what religion did Prodicus, the Chion, leave to men, who held that everything beneficial to human life should be numbered among the gods? Were not they likewise void of religion, who taught that the deities, at present the object of our prayers and adoration, were valiant, illustrious, and mighty men, who arose to divinity after death? Euhemerus, whom our Aeneas translated and followed more than the other authors, has particularly advanced this doctrine, and treated the deaths and burials of the gods. Can he, then, be said to have confirmed religion, or rather to have totally subverted it? I shall say nothing of that sacred and august Eleusina, into whose mysteries the most distant nations were initiated, nor of the solemnities in Samothrace or in Lemnos, secretly resorted to by night, and surrounded by thick and shady groves, which, if they were properly explained, and reduced to reasonable principles, would rather explain the nature of things than discover the knowledge of the gods. 43. Even that great man Democritus, from whose fountains Epicurus watered his little garden, seems to me to be very inferior to his usual acuteness when speaking about the nature of the gods. For at one time he thinks that there are images endowed with divinity, inherent in the universality of things, at another that the principles and minds contained in the universe are gods. Then he attributes divinity to animated images, employing themselves in doing us good or harm, And lastly, he speaks of certain images of such vast extent that they encompass the whole outside of the universe, all which opinions are more worthy of the country of Democritus than of Democritus himself. For who can frame in his mind any ideas of such images? Who can admire them? Who can think they merit a religious adoration? But Epicurus, when he divests the gods of the power of doing good, extirpates all religion from the minds of men. For though he says the divine nature is the best and most excellent of all natures, he will not allow it to be susceptible of any benevolence, by which he destroys the chief and peculiar attribute of the most perfect being. For what is better and more excellent than goodness and beneficence? To refuse your gods that quality is to say that no man is any object of their favor, and no gods either, that they neither love nor esteem anyone, in short, that they not only give themselves no trouble about us, but even look on each other with the greatest indifference. 44. How much more reasonable is the doctrine of the Stoics, whom you censure? It is one of their maxims that the wise are friends to the wise, though unknown to each other. For as nothing is more amiable than virtue, he who possesses it is worthy of our love, to whatever country he belongs. But what evils do your principles bring, when you make good actions and benevolence the marks of imbecility? For not to mention the power and nature of the gods, you hold that even men, if they had no need of mutual assistance, would be neither courteous nor beneficent. Is there no natural charity in the dispositions of good men? The very name of love, from which friendship is derived, is dear to men, and if friendship is to center in our own advantage only, without regard to him whom we esteem a friend, it cannot be called friendship, but a sort of traffic for our own profit. Pastures, lands, and herds of cattle are valued in the same manner on account of the profit we gather from them. But charity and friendship expect no return. How much more reason have we to think that the gods, who want nothing, should love each other and employ themselves about us? If it were not so, why should we pray to or adore them? Why do the priests preside over the altars, and the augurs over the auspices? What have we to ask of the gods, and why do we prefer our vows to them? But Epicurus, you say, has written a book concerning sanctity, a trifling performance, by a man whose wit is not so remarkable in it, as the unrestrained license of writing which he has permitted himself. For what sanctity can there be if the gods take no care of human affairs? Or how can that nature be called animated which neither regards nor performs anything? Therefore, our friend Posidonius has well observed, in his 5th book of the Nature of the Gods, that Epicurus believed that there were no gods, and that what he had said about the immortal gods was only said from a desire to avoid unpopularity. He could not be so weak as to imagine that the deity has only the outward features of a simple mortal without any real solidity, that he has all the members of a man without the least power to use them, a certain unsubstantial pellucid being, neither favorable nor beneficial to anyone, neither regarding nor doing anything. There can be no such being in nature. And as Epicurus said this plainly, he allows the gods in words, and destroys them in fact. And if the deity is truly such a being that he shows no favor, no benevolence to mankind, away with him. For why should I entreat him to be propitious? He can be propitious to none, since, as you say, all his favor and benevolence are the effects of imbecility.